to Science with Armstrong. In this video, we will be talking about enzymes. Enzymes generally are going to be a protein. Sometimes they can be RNA, a ribozyme. Many of the enzymes that we have end in ASE. This kind of gives us an idea that it is an enzyme. If you remember back to sugars ended in OSE, like glucose, amylose, that sort of thing. Enzymes tend to end in ASE. Not all of them. There are many that don't follow this rule. But generally, if you see something with ASE, you can probably assume that it's an enzyme. So if I said something like acetylcholine esterase, big long word, but you hear or you see that it ends in ase, that you know that it's an enzyme. Enzymes are molecules that speed up the rate of the reaction. They generally speed up rates of reaction by lowering the activation energy. So lowering how much energy needs to go into that reaction in order for it to occur. I'm going to draw a very generalized picture of what an enzyme could be. So that way we could take a look at a couple of features of enzymes. Enzymes have an active site. The active site here is the place where the reaction occurs. So on our enzyme, we have this site where one or more molecules will come, sit, react, and then leave. So this is our enzyme. This is our active site. We have a substrate. The substrate are the molecules that will sit in the active site is going to be specific to that substrate. So the substrate is the reactants. In an enzyme catalyzed reaction. So when the enzyme and the reactants are sitting together and reacting, this is called the enzyme substrate complex. It is basically just the reaction occurring as the substrates are doing their thing, either joining together or separating apart, depending on the type of reaction that it is. And the substrate will then leave the enzyme, and the enzyme can then be reused for another reaction. Here is a graph showing energy versus the reaction and how much energy is required. The bottom line here is with the enzyme. The top line is without the enzyme. So this is the amount of energy at the start of the reaction. Without an enzyme, we have to climb a really large hill. So there's quite a bit of energy needed in order to get that reaction to go and get it up over the hill. This bottom line here is with the enzyme. So you can see that there's a big difference between the amount of energy needed with an enzyme and without an enzyme. Enzyme is lowering that activation energy. Activation energy is basically the amount of energy it takes to get to the top of that hill in order for the reaction to occur. So our reactants start here at this energy. Without an enzyme, there's a shorter hill, a smaller hill to get over. Without an enzyme, that hill is a lot taller, a lot bigger, requiring a lot more energy to get to the top and to get to the other side to our products. And then you can see the energy of the products at the end. So enzymes lower that activation energy. With enzymes, there are times where you don't necessarily want the enzyme to be working. You want to shut down the enzyme. Maybe it's to save energy. Maybe it's because you are done using it. So you're just putting it into that inactive state. Or maybe you're taking a medicine that is shutting down a particular enzyme in order to stop its action. So that way it's not doing the process that's not making you well. So there are a couple types of inhibition Competitive inhibition is when the competitive molecule is very similar shape to the substrate, and it actually binds to the active site and blocks the active site from that substrate from binding. So if you block the active site from the substrate, you're not going to have that reaction occur with the substrate. So that's competitive. Competitive inhibition can be reversible or irreversible. An example of a reversible competitive inhibition is using Relenza, a drug used to treat the flu. What Relenza is it's a inhibitive competitor that blocks the enzyme neuraminidase. Sorry if I said that wrong, but it's essentially blocking an enzyme, binds to the active site and shuts down that enzyme, which allows the virus to, so the drug binds to the enzyme and blocks the viral, so the drug competitively binds to the active site of this enzyme, which basically stops the protein from being made that allows the viruses to escape the cell. So the viruses are then going to stay within the cell and keeping the flu from invading other cells. So stopping the spread of the flu within your own body. Irreversible competitive inhibition is when the competitor permanently binds to the active site, essentially shutting down that enzyme and not allowing that enzyme to ever be used again. An example of this is nerve gas. Nerve gas essentially binds to acetylcholine esterase, which is an enzyme that helps with muscle relaxation after a contraction. Muscles are going to be in a permanent contraction because it can't break down the things that it needs to break down in order to go into the relaxed state. And these enzymes are permanently shut down, so they basically, you can't recover from it. Then we have non-competitive inhibition. Non-competitive inhibition is when the competitor doesn't bind to the active site, but it binds to another site somewhere else on the enzyme called the allosteric site. And essentially here, the competitor is going to bind in to this other spot, changing the shape of the enzyme and not allowing the substrate to bind to the active site because of that structural change. An example of a non-competitive inhibitor would be cyanide. What cyanide does is it binds to an allosteric site with one of your cytochrome enzymes, which is in the electron transport chain of cellular respiration. So essentially what you're doing is you're shutting down the electron transport chain, not allowing the electrons to go to that final electron acceptor of oxygen. And if you're not getting those electrons to oxygen, you're not forming ATP. You're not forming ATP, then you're basically not getting the cell energy that you need. So you have cofactors and coenzymes. Cofactors and coenzymes are accessory molecules that can help the activation of certain enzymes. Some enzymes need cofactors or coenzymes in order to work, and sometimes it might help speed up the rate of the enzyme reaction by having this cofactor or coenzymes. Cofactors tend to be your minerals, and coenzymes tend to be organic molecules that attach to the active site along with the substrate to help it function. And these are things often like your vitamins. So let's talk about disruptions to enzymes. What are things that are going to disrupt an enzyme? When enzymes break, it's called denature. So denaturation. This is basically the enzyme breaking. Bonds are broken between some of the molecules, and the protein is no longer functioning. So when you break a protein, when you break an enzyme, it's denaturing it, breaking those bonds, causing it to lose its shape. When you lose shape, or when you change shape, you change function. And in this case, changing the shape is going to completely break it. Generally, when you denature a protein, it is done. There are several factors that play a role in denaturation, so things like pH. There's generally a good pH range for most enzymes, and when you get to high or low above that range, you'll denature the protein in it not working. Things like temperature. When it gets too hot or too cold for that enzyme, depending on that enzyme, it could denature the protein. So if we take a look at a graph for pH and temperature, it's going to generally be a bell curve. If on this axis we have our rate of reaction, and on this axis we either have pH or temperature, we might see something like this, where there's a very ideal pH or temperature that enzyme will work at, and then when you start moving away from that ideal pH or temperature, the rate is going to drop. And it can be different for different enzymes. Some enzymes, such as the ones in your stomach, are going to work at a very low pH, where the ones in your small intestine are going to work at a little bit higher pH. So if you were to take the enzymes that are in your stomach, remove them and put them in the small intestine, they're not really going to work all that well. The stomach has hydrochloric acid in it, which helps activate those enzymes and allowing those enzymes to work at a very low pH. The small intestine has a buffer in it, and it raises the pH, making it more basic, less acidic, and that those stomach enzymes won't work as well in the intestine because it needs that very strong acid in order to work. So depending on the enzyme will depend on the ideal pH, and also depending on the temperature in the enzyme. Some enzymes are going to withstand more heat. We will be doing a lab later this year where we're going to be doing PCR. And in order to do PCR, you need a DNA polymerase. You need an enzyme that is going to put together your DNA molecule. If we use the polymerase that is in the human body, it can generally withstand only up to about 37 to 40 degrees Celsius because that's our body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. But we are going to be heating it up to about 95 degrees Celsius, way above the range of that protein can withstand. So what scientists have done is figured out that the DNA polymerase of organisms that live in hot springs work very well because those organisms live in a very hot area and can copy their DNA. So using their DNA polymerase, it can withstand a lot higher heat than the ones that we have in our body. So denaturation is not always necessarily final. Sometimes it is reversible. An example of reversible denaturation would be with your hair. This is not necessarily enzymes, but just with the protein in general. But when you apply heat to your hair, you denature the keratin within the hair, and which causes it to straighten. So you're basically breaking some of the bonds within the keratin in order to straighten the hair. So if those of you that have curly hair, you know that when you apply heat to your hair and straighten it, the next time you take a shower or it gets humid out, those bonds are basically put back together and your hair is curly again. So if you straighten your hair once with heat, it's not going to stay that way. So that kind of denaturation is actually reversible. So denaturation, not always permanent. It sometimes can be reversible, but oftentimes it is. Okay, so with pH and enzymes, pH is essentially going to disrupt the hydrogen bonds. So with denaturation, pH is going to disrupt the hydrogen bonds within the enzyme. So when you get out of range of the pH, you're going to be breaking too many of the hydrogen bonds that are there, breaking the enzyme. Temperature, on a general whole, temperature is going to increase in temperature is going to increase the number of collisions. But it will come to a point where the temperature gets too high, breaks the bonds within the enzyme, and then the enzyme denatures. Other things that we can look at is enzyme concentration and substrate concentration. Basically, how much enzyme is there to react and how much substrate is there to react. Both of these have a similar graph in the rate. So again, we have rate over here, and then we have concentration down here. And this can be enzyme concentration or substrate concentration. Essentially what's going to happen is you're going to have pretty much a big increase, and then at some point it's going to start to level out, because at this point here is essentially when you are running out of enzyme and there's only so much the enzyme can do, or you're running out of substrate and the enzymes are not necessarily, can't go any faster because there's not enough substrate to be reacting to have a such a fast rate increase. So we can see that with both enzyme concentration and substrate concentration, when you get to this point, you'd either have to add more substrate or more enzyme for the rate to keep going up. Alrighty, so that is enzymes. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.